Supported show, so if you do want to support the channel, you can go to the VinnyEastwoodShow.com and start supporting me today with automatic payments and whatnot. And here's the main reason why. It's my little baby.
Oh, my baby. Oh, my baby. Daddy loves you. Oh, you're so cute.
All right, excellent. So, right, ladies and gentlemen, there's the reason to donate, and you can go and donate at the VinnyEastwoodShow.com. Backup channel is running, and let's get running. Oh, whoopsie. Sorry, guys. Sorry about this. Having a little bit of a flip-floppening. Okay, here we go. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show, broadcasting live on AmericanFreedomRadio.com and on YouTube. Thank you very much for joining in. I am not a credible journalist. I'm an incredible journalist. And my very special guest is John Rappoport. His website there is nomorefakenews.com. This episode today here is sponsored by the New Zealand Public Party, Billy TK. So, John, welcome and thank you very much for joining us here today on the program. Would you be able to give your first impressions of the Advanced New Zealand Public Party?
Well, it's good to be here, Vinny. My first impression is that I'm positively amazed that there is a political party, a serious party, that is even taking up these issues, the fluoride issue, the COVID-19 lockdowns, in particular, vaccinations. Those would be the three big ones for me. And to see any sort of political movement in that direction of challenging the status quo and the official directives and the fake science around these things is an extremely welcome development. Of course, over here on the east coast of the U.S., I don't know the people, I don't know the candidates, but from reading what they have to say about the issues, more power to them. And I hope that many people in New Zealand become aware of these things, because our survival depends on it.
Our survival. This is something I've been thinking about for, basically since I started my career nearly 12 years ago, is that it's not just you guys there in the United States. It's not just us here in New Zealand. It's a global network that we're part of and up against to a large degree. I mean, is there already a new world order? I think there is, but it's not fully formed and finished yet.
I agree. It's in process. It's been in process for a long time, but it hasn't been, let's say, as violent in its impact until COVID-19. Of course, we had the World Trade Organization really went into high gear in the 1990s, meaning globalism, the effort to create such a powerful mega corporate empire, you might say, globally, that nobody would be able to resist it, where global corporate predators would be able to move in and out of countries at will, pay no tariffs on their products, and control countries, control the economies of countries. Well, now we fast forward to this phase of the New World Order, which is wrecking economies completely under the guise of a story about a virus. That's one thing that I think people really do have to understand. The globalists are selling a story about a virus, and under that cover, they are claiming that there is a need to lock down and really wreck the economies of nations all over the world. Well, why would they want to do that? Because when you bring people down to their knees and you disable them in such a gross manner, so destructively and with such a psychic shock, they're much easier to control. You can make them much more dependent. You can say to somebody, your business went bankrupt, you lost your job, your family's in disarray, et cetera, et cetera. The government is here to rescue you, and all you have to do is trade everything you've got, essentially, for government assistance, as the way it's going to play out. And so a gateway has been produced to lead us into a smart world, a technocratic world where there is, as in China, happening as we speak, 24/7 wall-to-wall surveillance at a level that we have not even seen yet. Publicly, privately, inside your body, which sounds like science fiction, but these phases are in development. In other words, that particles would be installed inside a person's body that would report out real-time physiological processes of the body and brain to a central point as a way of predicting behavior and influencing behavior, but predicting behavior. So what's now in the process of being sold to the global population is, look, we must have a borderless world where everybody is governed basically by the same people at the top, so that we never have another one of these surprise pandemics again. Early warning signs, predictability, et cetera, and in order for that to happen, we're going to have continuous monitoring at a very intimate level of everything that every individual is doing, how they're behaving, signs, symptoms, all of the above, so that we can catch this kind of thing early. This is not true. This is another story. This is a sales job. This is what they, meaning Rockefeller-type globalists, Bill Gates-type globalists, want to impose on the population. They want to create society to resemble a highly organized machine. And what I'm describing here, many people scoff at and say this is ridiculous conspiracy theory. It's the furthest thing from it. It's very simple. When engineers and technocrats of a certain mindset look at the world and the population, what they see is something begging to be organized within an inch of its life on every level. They blame politicians for chaos, mistakes, errors, wars, et cetera, and they say, we can solve all of this. All you have to do, people, is obey us, and we will organize society in such a way that there is peace and security for all.
So it's kind of like a psychopath with obsessive compulsive disorder who's got the reins of control on the entire planet. You know, I just need to organise this and micromanage that, and then everything will be fine. But there'll always be some speck of dust for them to rush and to make a big fuss about. And the media has fueled this virus. You know, I keep having to remind people, COVID didn't shut down your business. The government did. Okay? These measures that are being taken to quote-unquote save you from the virus are doing far more damage, and will probably do more damage in the long run than if we'd done nothing. And it goes completely against the Hippocratic Oath to, you know, do harm. That sort of thing. Is there legitimacy for these lockdowns? Is there legitimacy for COVID? And as you're saying, it sounds like science fiction, but my perspective is, as a science fiction fan, that what people who are writing and making science fiction movies do before they write, before they finish their screenplays, is they go out to all the people that know what's coming, all the people who've been involved in studies, the people who've been planning. And then they write their scripts and they do their books and their movies around that. You know, people didn't just come up with 1984. People didn't just come up with a Brave New World. It was planned already, and they simply fictionalized it so that people would think that it was an imaginary threat instead of a real one.
Yeah, that's a mouthful, Vinny. Let's start at the top. The lockdowns are completely insane and completely counterproductive if you were to assume that indeed there's a virus spreading across the world. If you were to make that assumption and listen to the official figures, which I'm not necessarily recommending at all, but just to give the official picture, they would tell you that within, let's say, 11 weeks of the announcement of the new coronavirus, it had spread to 99 countries and there were 30,000 cases worldwide. In other words, if you make their assumptions, the whole thing is unstoppable. The spread would be completely unstoppable, which means that the only strategy for defeating this would be to have the entire population acquire natural immunity to it. And that means exposing everybody to it, not trying to separate people and lock them down, because people locked down would simply be percolating the virus in their bodies, and when you release them from prison, so to speak, the spread would escalate again. You would only be postponing the inevitable. So even if you accept the official premises, which I do not, but I enter their world to show how ridiculous it is, natural immunity would only be acquired by exposing the population to this, which was the initial strategy of Boris Johnson in the UK. Even Trump was leaning in that direction in America until, and I have no words to describe this guy, Neil Ferguson, that I could put on the air, but this is an abysmally failed computer modeler from the Imperial College of London, financed to the tune of tens of millions of dollars by Bill Gates every year, who came up with this absurd prediction of 500,000 deaths in the UK and 2 million in America. He has a track record of one failure of a prediction after another. Just to give you one idea, in 2005, he predicted that bird flu could kill 200 million people worldwide. The official final tally was several hundred. So this guy's prediction...
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Could we see this as natural progression? Like he goes from one bad prediction to another because he's ordered to?
Yes, well, he certainly bankrolled to do that. And how else, you know, you could try to explain this in several different ways, but it's highly improbable that someone whose predictions are a string of failures, one after another, would be vaulted into a fantastic position of influence so that the UK government would make an abrupt U-turn, and so would the US, and say, now we must lock down everybody in order to stop this from spreading, which is exactly what happened.
Whereas in Sweden, for example, they had no lockdowns of this nature, and they're fine.
Exactly. And other places, for example, in the U.S. and South Dakota, South Carolina to some degree, where there was resistance to the whole idea. You know, the figures show that this is not going to be any more serious a problem than in the countries where the lockdowns are instituted and are destroying the economies, which again is the point of the whole exercise, is to destroy the economies. The virus.
Could you put that into context? Could you put that into context? Has there been a historical destruction of economies in order to increase government power?
Well, yes. The Great Depression of 1929 and the 1930s, which was basically engineered by expanding and deflating credit. Yes, we've got lots of money. No, we don't have any money. And suddenly, squeeze play, everybody's caught in the middle. Nothing really changes in terms of the production engine of the country, same as now. If you were to look around before these lockdowns started, you would say, well, nothing has really changed here. The production engines of the world are still operative. They haven't been destroyed or impaired. People are still ready to go to work. It's a story and the imposition of power from above, from the governments, that are creating this horrendous wreckage. So, yes, you would have the Great Depression, for example, lots of booms and busts that are engineered. For example, the failure of 2008, which was quite serious in the United States and in other places. And what happens? People who have a great deal of power and money come in and buy up properties, businesses, assets at bargain basement prices. You have a coalescence of more and more power at the top and less the rest of the way. It's an age-old strategy. It goes back to the Old Testament. If anybody remembers the story of Joseph in the Old Testament, who becomes an advisor to the Pharaoh in Egypt during a famine, he convinces the population to give him all of their wheat to store up. He then sells back a portion of the wheat to the population in exchange for their assets. And then as a final step, when they're still starving, he says, well, I'll give you one more pile of wheat if you sell yourselves to the Pharaoh. And they do. That's engineered economic wreckage, and the result, which is basically people become slaves. They become slaves to power.
So if I may, that means that all the people running around in New Zealand who are having their businesses destroyed by this lockdown, they're running around confused. Why would the government do this? I don't understand. And perhaps they need to understand that there are people in this world that are not like them, that don't think like them, who will in fact do terrible, horrible things to other human beings just for the power of it.
They certainly do need to understand that. And they also certainly need to understand that some of these government officials are themselves brainwashed into believing the story that's being now sold about COVID, or they're being controlled by people that you don't see, either via blackmail, pressure that's exerted upon them. Lawyers, for example, who would say to them, well, you could be held responsible for the deaths of people if you don't lock down the population. I mean, there's all kinds of strategies that are used to make politicians act in certain ways. But yes, at the top, what you're talking about is something that, let's say, as you're talking about, the people of New Zealand who own businesses have to realize, yes, there are people who have a great deal of power, and that's what they want, and those people are not like them. They don't live that way. They don't think that way. They don't behave that way. They don't have empathy for other human beings. They are psychopaths and sociopaths. And you have to deal with that and come to grips with it. The people who own businesses in New Zealand should understand that there is no good reason under the sun to close down, lock down any of those businesses. And I don't care what the experts say, or the government of New Zealand says, or the scientists say, who would say, or scoff at all of this and say this is ridiculous, this is a conspiracy theory. No, they are the conspiracists. And even some of their own experts who are being strangled and choked off from access to media, to government, are saying what I'm saying, basically, which is, if you want to assume that a virus is spreading, there's only really one way to stop it, and that is through the acquisition of exposure of the entire population, called natural immunity. This is what needs to be understood here. The lockdowns are terrorism. The lockdowns are government claiming they're doing the right thing, but the government is being completely destructive of all of the effort, all of the work, all of the sweat and blood and tears that have been poured into building genuine businesses up over long, long periods of time. Talking mainly here about small and medium-sized businesses and the people who own them, who are being cut off at the knees, their life's work destroyed, under the pretext that this has something to do with the pandemic, which is a non sequitur, is absolute baloney, should not be believed, and to the degree that this budding political party in New Zealand is pointing out the flaws and the insanity of all of this lockdown, they need to expand. They need to get bigger. They need to have more adherents. They need to have their message spread to the point where people simply rebel and say, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to open up. We have to open up. You're trying to destroy us and kill us and take away our right to earn a living and say that you can do this at any moment that you want to. You can open up, you can shut down, you can open up again, you can shut down, just because you claim to know something that we don't understand, and that's a lie. This is what's going on, and people have to wake up to realize this.
I think so, and this crisis has kind of like tripped me a little bit. I was thinking, what happened to the war on terror? Does anybody hear anything about the war on terror anymore? No. And I'm starting to think that that was a manufactured crisis too. It was sort of like COVID is manufactured, right? And I'm not talking about, oh, the virus isn't real, it's all fake or anything like that. I'm more thinking about the fact that one morning I saw that there were 17 articles from New Zealand Herald TV talking about COVID-19. This is more articles than they have in their entire publication normally. It's just flooding absolutely everywhere. It's as if the COVID virus just walked past a stack of TVs that had a camera in it and said, hey, look! Hey guys, I'm on TV. Look how big I am. Oh my God. And the virus just got so full of itself and everybody started watching it, and then everybody started freaking out as a result. And this whole crisis came into being. It's sort of like how 9/11 was used, and as soon as these towers come down, and you see them come down again and again and again and again and again, until all of a sudden not enough people are questioning it and the legitimacy of it, to the point where now everybody's under a war on terror. Are we now in the post 9/11 age? We're now in the post COVID age, whereby a pretext is given and a whole bunch of subsequent formats of curtailing of people's freedoms get introduced over a long period of time. A long enough period of time so that by the time all of the people's rights are gone, they'll forget why they lost them in the first place, and then a new crisis will come to take away even more rights over a long period of time.
Yes, that's the MO. That's the way that power operates, exactly as you said. And so there was a tabletop exercise in the fall of 2019 in New York called Event 201. Very elite types from Johns Hopkins, the Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum, sent people there to model a proposed possible outbreak pandemic. And one of the major things that came out of this meeting was, if and when this happens, we, the leaders, must flood the messaging, as you just described, wall to wall, nonstop, 24/7, to basically sell our story, to use as a rationale for the means and methods that we will then deploy on the population to pacify them and subdue them and get them to obey and go along with whatever we tell them to go along with. Of course, this was all put into a context of necessity and pandemic and virus and so on and so forth, but that was the gist of the thing. So yes, this was the plan, to put the messengers, so to speak, in place so that when the outbreak was announced, the message would spread globally in a matter of hours, and that it would become ceaseless and endless to the point at which a majority of the population would bow down and kneel and submit to this message of fear and the need to take vital measures of control in order to survive. This is the way it goes. So my job, or one of my jobs over the years, because I've started investigating so-called epidemics and so on back in the 1980s, was to look at the actual science. The science behind viruses, the science behind vaccines, to investigate it to the point at which I would be able to go way beyond the pronouncements of official government science and see what the truth is. And I know we don't have all night to talk about this, but I would just bring up here the question of, how do scientists and researchers actually discover a new virus? What are
if
the
I may,
steps
I'm just going to assume that, this is just total guess by the way, that they use the exact same method as psychiatry. They vote on it. Oh, is this a disease? Is this a disease? Yeah, I reckon so. And then they just, we've created a new disease.
Well, they do that, yes, but they also do some very, let's call it, private fiddling in the lab to make it come down to earth.
Explain.
Very technical fiddling that uses language that basically only they can understand.
So it's a fraud.
So that when they come out with a pronouncement that they've discovered a new virus, everybody salutes, including governments, medical journals, the public, other professional scientists, and nobody says, ho, 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 wait. What did you actually do? Step by step. We want to have someone there to film this. We want independent observers because, after all, you know, you are now basing a complete global pandemic, you claim, on this discovery of a new virus. You're wrecking the world. So we would like to know exactly what the hell you're doing. Very specifically, step by step. This has been one of my areas of research. And one of the things that I discovered is that there is no reason to believe, in terms of the science, that what these researchers say when they emerge from the lab, aha, here it is, the new virus. There is no reason to just simply accept what they say as being true, or to believe it, or to obey everything that flows from it. The same with vaccination. The same with fluorides. All of these issues. I mean, any sensible person in New Zealand or the rest of the world can understand that fluorides are a medical treatment that's dumped in the water, and that there are rules and traditions and laws that guarantee that people have what's called informed consent to be treated medically before it ever happens. And if you dump something that turns out to be poison in the water and you call it medical treatment, what kind of informed consent ever existed in the first place? What kind of consent, if the federal government is really controlling it, and what informed is happening if people never given access to the information about what fluorides actually are? There is no informed consent. There's no science going on here. There is fakery and liability and should be prison going on here. That's the truth, if anybody cares about it, and this new political party appears to care very much about it. And so they should keep pushing this to the hilt so that New Zealanders wake up and say, yeah, you know, I'm being treated medically for something that I never consented to. And I can't consent to if the federal government is in charge of this, if I can't at least have access in my small community to making the decision whether to dump this stuff in the water or not. It even goes beyond that, because if you actually look at studies that show that fluorides are toxic and poisonous, there are laws already on the books against poisoning people. It doesn't matter what you call it. There are laws that put people in jail for poisoning people, and that's what we're actually talking about here.
That's right. And in the case of New Zealand, when it comes to fluoride, it's illegal to dump toxic chemicals into the drinking water. But toxic chemicals are under a classification whereby a vagary of local council law means that if you sell a toxin, because of commercial law, it's no longer classified as a toxin. So you can sell toxins to local councils, and local councils can dump toxins into the water supply because legally at that point they're not classified as toxins anymore. Isn't that
wow.
Yeah, it's good, right?
Wow.
And when you were talking,
who thought that one up? I'm sure.
Well, it's I think it was done in the United States first and foremost, and then exported here. But the question is, like, how did these new things come up? How do we find these new viruses? And when you were talking about it, I couldn't help but think about derivatives. Oh, we've created this new financial instrument. Really, how did you create that instrument? What does it actually do? And they can't actually explain what it is because it's a fraud. And so once they've got this new financial instrument that everybody just pretends exists, they then bulk up the entire economy with it, and then they collapse the economy, and then the man in charge of the derivatives, John Key from New Zealand, formerly of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, in charge of the derivatives trade and bond market in Europe, comes home to New Zealand to save us from this terrible financial crisis. And then after he gets the country into hundreds of billions of dollars in debts, including more derivatives, he then steps down and says, there's no conspiracy here. I'm just a Jewish Freemason banker who's stepping down, okay? There's nothing to be suspicious about.
Yeah. This is that's a very good metaphor. It's the same thing when the closer you look, the more emptiness and fraud and nothing you actually see. It's from a distance when you are looking at the television tube or the news and they're hammering you night and day, new case numbers, new death numbers, new lockdowns. No, we're opening up. No, we're locking down, whipsawing the public back and forth. That's when the effect of the fear and the obedience really kick in. That's the storytelling. I mean, this goes back to the beginning of time. The dictator sits there with his priest class And he says, what story are we going to tell in order to control all these people? Because look, they're unruly. They want freedom. They want independence. They want to do different things, and we don't want that. We want them all in one place. So I understand we can use the army. We can just simply make them slaves. But there's a certain law of diminishing return there. After a while, they rebel. They don't want to work. They can't work. We work them to death and so on. So is there some other way we can work this? And the priests, of course, say, yes, sir, there are other ways. We tell a story. A story? What kind of story? A story about an enemy, for example, that exists. What enemy? It doesn't really matter. We make up the enemy. We invent the enemy. We flesh out the enemy. We warn people. We completely immerse them in this story of the enemy and of what we must do and how we must behave and how we must think and what the enemy thinks like and how he behaves, etc., etc. And we can cast this story in physical terms, in spiritual terms. We can sell any kind of story you want because we're the priest class and that's what we do for a living. That's how we make our paycheck every week, sir. So what would you like? We have a menu here. You can choose. And so in COVID-19, we're seeing a replay of the oldest technique that ever existed on the planet. It's the same thing dressed up with technology, you see, as the glue that seems to hold it all together. Because the experts say, believe us when we tell you what's happening. In America, this little Dr. Anthony Fauci, for many people, has assumed the status of a little god. Simply, why? Because he's on television. And because he says things that a lot of people think contradict Trump. So he must be a god. And they worship this guy. Whereas in truth, he rose to his position through politics. Because official science, it's the same in New Zealand, it's the same everywhere. The people who appear on television as the public health experts briefing the country have nothing to do with science. They rose to their position inside a political hierarchy, and that's why they're there. There are literally thousands of scientists in New Zealand who know more about basic medicine and science than they do. But those people who dissent are not given a voice on television. They're not given credence by the government. They're not allowed to say, wait a minute, what so-and-so government expert is saying is completely incorrect. And here's why. And we're willing to enter into a debate, a prolonged and honest debate, which we think is necessary if you're going to destroy the economy of New Zealand, after all, based on a story. We think we deserve a seat at the table to debate the story that you're selling. And then the government says, no, you're not. And that's the end of that. It then comes down to the people.
What are we looking at here? I mean, we've had reports in the chat room that the New Zealand elections have been delayed as of today to the 17th of October. That's an extra month on to it. If anybody in the chat room can confirm this, that'd be good. But we're looking at what might be considered extra political actions and things of that nature in order to wake up the population and mobilise them to defeat this, well, for lack of a better word, evil. What kind of actions should we be thinking about?
How do you delay an election?
By the Prime Minister having dictatorial power granted to them by the sovereign of the state who's absent in action, and just saying so. That's how everything is done in New Zealand.
Okay, so in other words, there is a date on the calendar when an election is supposed to take place, but the Prime Minister can just erase that and say, we're going to put it off.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, well, obviously, the prime minister or people behind the prime minister believe that something threatening on the horizon could happen if they hold the election as scheduled, and they want to shore up their defense against that by postponing it. I'm sure they have a pretext. Well, the lockdowns don't permit us to vote in person, etc., or whatever it is. But that's a very dangerous sign if it's really happening there. Anytime somebody says we're postponing an election, you're really walking on thin ice.
So, in terms of not politics, in terms of individuals. Like I make this show and I try to wake up my fellow man, but I want them to not just sit there listening to my show. I want them to get up, stop listening to the show, and go and do something. You know, that's the entire point of it. I've had people who have started doing their own shows because of me. I've had people quit their jobs because of me. I've had people do all sorts of things because of me other than listen to the show. And that's, in my opinion, the best thing that they could be doing, because otherwise I'm just sitting here wasting their time and they're not gaining any knowledge that they use, and knowledge that you find no use for is the definition of useless knowledge. What knowledge have we accumulated, John, that we could actually dispense to people right now, that they could actually get out there and start effecting real change?
Well, there are several levels of this. The first level is information itself and spreading true information to many, many people, let's say in this case in New Zealand. Your broadcasts, articles that they find that penetrate the lies and tell the truth. You know, every person who has a computer can be a media outlet, even if that involves only spreading links and articles and videos and so forth to as many people as possible. That's one level, certainly important, because like you, I've seen many things blossom out of information that you would never be able to predict. Good things that happen. So that's one level. Anybody can do that. But on a, let's say, day-to-day practical level, it's going to take many people coming out of the shadows, going back to work. That's the simplest way I can put it. For example, now I know that New Zealand is a different situation than America in terms of land mass and population especially. But in America, I get reports about what's happening here and there and everywhere that the news is not covering. And there are many more pockets of the economy opening up in America than the media are willing to report on, or governments are willing to report on, or people in power want anybody to know about. And this is serious stuff. People just saying, well, here we go. We have to open up. Otherwise, I mean, what are we going to do? We just sit there and take a tiny government check and starve to death? So people come out and they go back to work, and they find ways to do that. That takes ingenuity, it takes courage, it takes guts, it takes a lot of things. But it's important to do, because that's the resistance ultimately. They want to shut down the economies. They want to make things so bad that people will beg for any pittance from government. You know, typical government looks at this situation and says, wow, I didn't even realize what a bonanza this is for us. Look at these people. I thought I knew what dependence on us was before. It's much greater than I even imagined. We are now exerting so much power over people and making them so dependent on us and what we do and what we do with money and what we do with rules, and it's incredible. We're sitting right up here on a perch. They don't want to desert that perch. The only thing that can make them do that is people armed with knowledge and the willingness to say, this whole thing is a charade. This whole thing is an illusion. People saying that to themselves, not because I say so or you say so, but because they come to that conclusion and they act on it. We've got to go back to work. We've got to go back to business. One way or another, pockets of business have to open and reopen and keep opening, so that what the government is doing is not going to destroy the country.
Let's think about this as well, because you've touched on something that reminded me of something I like to say quite a lot about, is that waking up to the truth is not enough. Just like waking up out of bed in the morning is not enough. You've got to get up and you've got to go to work. Okay, and as you were talking about the government now mandating people to do all of this stuff, and now people are going to become even more dependent on government handouts just in order to survive, just remember the old saying, there is always free cheese in a mousetrap. And I was thinking about this 5G installation all happening at the same time of this coronavirus, and a lot of people been going on about the health effects of 5G and this, that or the other, but what they very rarely touch on is the surveillance capabilities of 5G and having gigabytes of downstream on data on everyone all the time. That kind of thing is not what people are really freaking out about, when perhaps they should, because with government personality profiles and now the new COVID tracing app and things of this nature, we'll be able to be tracked and traced absolutely everywhere that we go, as if we weren't already, but now it'll be overt, in your face. It used to be covert surveillance on all of us, and has a little psychological thing, and like, oh, well, maybe it won't be me, maybe it won't be me, but when it's overt, in your face, it will be me, and now I need to inform on my neighbours. That's the real part that we're going to be getting into now with these lockdowns and things of that nature, is the start-up of some kind of a neighbourhood digital Stasi to surveil everybody who doesn't do precisely what the government tells them to do.
I'm really glad you brought this up, Vinny, because absolutely, when people talk about 5G, the surveillance aspect, exactly as you said. And if you look at China, China is the model that is being followed here. China is setting the standard in terms of surveillance. So much information is coming out about what China is actually doing in terms of artificial intelligence, surveillance, smart cities. 5G enables what's called the Internet of Things, which means that surveillance capabilities in the home, in the bedroom, at work, in public spaces, everywhere, is magnified by millions of degrees. And this is the panopticon effect that is being sold to the world and bought by the world. And what I mean by the world is major corporations, governments, and so on and so forth. This is the technocratic dream. This is what these people that I referred to earlier as engineers are thinking about. And not just thinking about, they're implementing, because they believe that this is how you organize society. Well, look, we have 7-8 billion people. You can't just let these people run around free and loose and so forth. I mean, then we wouldn't have any models. We wouldn't be able to predict. We wouldn't be able to shape. We wouldn't be able to organize. We wouldn't be able to fit people into slots and say, this is where you belong and this is what you do. And if you don't do it, these are the penalties that you incur. Wake up, people. This is the New World Order. This is the way these people like Bill Gates are thinking. This guy is a problem solver. That's the way his mind operates. He sets objectives, and then he works out details in order to achieve those objectives. And he looks at populations as simply part of that process. And the only way that he can solve the problems that he's interested in if these populations are controlled to the hilt. And how do you do that? You do it through surveillance all of the time that's tied to behavior, which in turn is tied to what the Chinese would call social credit scores. But here we could just simply say your survival depends on your behavior. Let's say we carry this whole charade of COVID-19 a few more steps, and the government basically is saying, look, we can guarantee pretty much baseline pathetic level of survival for you, okay? But in return for that, we're going to surveil you 24/7 and possible in ways that you can't even imagine, in ways that will predict your tendencies and your behavior and so forth. And if we see that there's maybe a tendency on your part to resist or rebel, then we're going to control you and step in immediately before you even do anything. You get that message? So now you're going to have to behave in order to eke out survival. And we're going to fit you into a slot in society, and that's going to be the next phase of the New World Order. This is not just some fantasy, folks. This is where these people are heading. This is called technocracy. This was a movement, as Patrick Wood, an historian about all of these things, has detailed in his book, Technocracy Rising. In the 1920s and 30s in America, this movement was born by engineers. They just didn't have the technology then. Now they do. For example, to impose energy quotas on nations, but also on every individual, because now they can measure in real time the total amount of energy being produced on the planet at any given moment and the amount consumed total at any given moment, and they can begin to allocate quotas. And at some point, some high-tech device in your house will say to you, Mr. Citizen, you're approaching your limit for the month on energy use. Now, we don't want you to go over the limit, because then red flags are going to be introduced about you, and your government payments are going to be cut, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to be instituting brownouts, and you're only going to be able to use your computer between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on alternate days for the rest of the month, and you're going to have to shut down 2 rooms in your house and not use any electricity there, etc., etc. But we'll make it through, because we're your friend and we're on your side, and you just do these things and you will not die, basically, is the message. That, I mean, people say this could never happen. It's happening. Their surveillance capability is escalating. You could surely see this.
If I may, John, when people say that this is absurd, nobody would ever do that. And it's like, no. You'd never do that, okay? You've got a conscience. You don't want to control people in their entire daily lives, but there are people who do. Indeed. Get over it. Stop living in fantasy land.
Get over it, indeed. Become tougher, I guess, is the only thing to say. More realistic, which is not to mean that you just become a drone or a drudge. Far from it. You actually become a visionary of the kind of world that you want, which I think everybody involved here, listening, watching, we want freedom, we want liberty, we want individual natural rights that do not really proceed from any government. They're inherent in people, and freedom from intrusion, inspection, surveillance, control, imposition of power. Okay, look around you and see what's happening. Understand that. These governments really don't care. They're willing to go along with the technocratic show and impose all of this because it makes things easier for them. Every person in a slot. Every slot has a function. Every function is networked to create a larger picture, which is a picture of how society operates. That's how these engineers think. And so you are not factored in as an individual, as a human being, as a spiritual being. That's the furthest thing from their mind when they look at you. And if this budding political party in New Zealand is conscious of this and is making this clear to people, this is like, daylight. Okay, there's some daylight there in the darkness. I mean, when I hear about lockdowns being imposed in New Zealand based on these fraudulent case numbers and so on, and I've documented, 16 different ways in which these case numbers are just cooked and fried and made up and invented and based on tests that spit out false positive results like coins from a rigged slot machine. All of that in detail. But the message here is they're using all of that information to impose the lockdowns, and it's fraudulent information. And you can't fall for it. You just can't do that.
That's right. And I wondered as well, this propensity that human beings have to be indifferent. How can we stop people from being indifferent? And I think, in general, they have to be made to suffer, and they have to be directed towards the cause of the suffering as a problem that need be solved. And at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, if you are out there suffering but you don't know what's causing your suffering, the New World Order, the technocracy, Agenda 21, that is what's causing your suffering. Global elites with their financing of varying forms of law, medicine, business, and politics. They're what is causing your suffering. And whilst you are still uninformed about that, you are a much easier person for them to control. Once you do get informed, on the other hand, when you see such and blah 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 appear again, saying the same thing as the other such and blah 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 was, you will be far less likely to fall for the BS. And that is indeed a methodology that you can use to defend yourself. That's the thing. We've forgotten, I think, John, to a large degree, that we have to be able to defend ourselves. I think we've grown weak, trusting, and pathetic to a large degree, and we are unable to defend ourselves, let alone react when lines are crossed.
Yes, and this is, my time is drawing to a close, so what I could say is I'm 82 years old, okay? Now, so I have a long memory of earlier times, and I used to live in New York for some very fertile years. I was actually born there. So I remember a time just in New York when people would not have stood for any of this. I mean, people that I knew, people all around me, the whole city, people, they were not the same people as the people now living in New York. If the mayor or the governor or somebody had tried to impose a lockdown on the population of New York, it never would have worked. People would have laughed in his face. They would have gone to work. They would have said, "Are you kidding? You're going to say that I can't work? I can't open my grocery store because of what, some germ that you're talking about?" Go on. Don't be ridiculous. And the whole city would have just, you could say rebelled, but they would have just gone about their business and said, don't mess with us. And it would have been over. Completely over. I mean, going back way before I was born, Henry Ford, who ran the Ford factory, was a dictocrat. He refused to allow unions. There were many strikes at his factory because the workers wanted better conditions and they wanted more money. And he ignored that. And he said, no, this is not going to happen, period. Forget it. Forget it. Well, these workers were tough people. So finally, they set on the strategy of a sit-in strike. They walked to work into the factory, which was not what you'd call a safe place for them. They sat down at their workbenches and they refused to work. That was their ultimate strike. And Henry Ford finally caved in, and he said, okay. His advisors had some influence, but it was the strike, the sit-in strike, that finally he said, okay, union is all right. We'll have a union, workers' union. Yes, okay, I give up. Just think about those men. If you had told those men, you can't go to work, we're going to keep you from coming to work because of a germ, they would have busted down whatever they had to bust down to get into the factory to go to work, because they had to support their families and because they wanted a better life for their children and so on and so forth. That's what the world was once, not that long ago. And that's what we have to get back to.
We have to get back to being real men, real women, real people who will not stand idly by while tyranny wishes to stomp its boots in our face. Essentially, we need courage again. We need responsibility again. We need to cast off our comfort, cast off those things that make us feel good, and endure some suffering now, lest the suffering tomorrow be all that much worse and irreversible. John Rappoport from nomorefakenews.com. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. And do you have any products, services, or donation options so that people can support your work? Please take a minute to let people know.
All I'll just say, Vinny, is that yes, they just go to nomorefakenews.com and they'll see what's there, and they can read about it and decide whether they want to order it and so on and so forth. But I just want to thank you. This has been very informative. I'm really glad to see that your voice is here. Seriously for New Zealand, but for more than New Zealand as well. So I appreciate the time very much.
Thank you so much, John, for yours. And you can check him out, ladies and gentlemen, at nomorefakenews.com. John Rappoport, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Vinny.
Thank you. All right, and there he goes, folks. John Rappoport from nomorefakenews.com. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us on the show today, and I do want to give you just a one. Well, that's very annoying. Just try to play a little video for you guys here. Here we are. It's my baby. So in the description, there are ways to donate to the Vinny Eastwood Show, and here's a good reason why.
It's my baby with the sweet. Oh, my Bubsy. Oh, my baby. Daddy loves you. Oh, you're so cute.
There we are, my little very, very cute baby. I love it so much. Okay, now the show has been going on for over 12 years now, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going anywhere. I've been here this whole time, giving platforms to people who need it, and even some people who don't need it, who simply you need to hear from to a large degree. So if you do support my work and you do want to help me support my baby and my family, my wife can't work, not only because of the lockdown, but because she is a stay-at-home mum, and you guys are helping us to be able to live essentially right now. So please go to thevinnieeastwoodshow.com and make a donation today. The Guerrilla Media email is guerrillamedia77@gmail.com. That's guerrillamedia77@gmail.com. We've had a comment in the chat room about how not having the necklace on the baby. In fact, we were just talking to the baby's granddad today, and midwife told him about that as well. So yeah, we won't be wearing that one on, but there's a bit of an old video anyway. So yeah, what else? Patreon. We want to get the Patreon over $1,000, ladies and gentlemen. At the moment, it's about 950. So if you go to patreon.com/Vinny Eastwood, that's Vinny with a Y because it's the most important question, and Eastwood, like go ahead, make my news. You can support us on Patreon there. And also, I keep forgetting to say this, there are actual rewards for donating to the Vinny Eastwood Show. That's right. If you go to the homepage, thevinnieeastwoodshow.com, it'll say, if you just scroll down a bit, have you already donated? Click here to get your special rewards, and when you click on that link there, it'll take you and it'll offer you the unlisted playlist that has interviews with police, archaeologists, and people like that who are actually afraid that those videos are out there because they're saying some incredibly controversial things that might actually get them, hurt or assassinated or something of that nature. So please be careful with those ones. That is the unlisted playlist for donors only. You also get the secret Vinny Eastwood Facebook group for donors only as well, so you can cruise in there and hang out with everybody else. And also, if you are a donor, you can suggest a guest. So if you've got somebody that you want me to bring on the show, particularly at this particular political time, anybody of national or international significance that can shed some light on any of the issues that we face here. In fact, one thing that I was trying to think about, let me finish this point. Yes, and then you can go to the contact page on the VinnyEastwoodShow.com, and you can send us their email or Facebook or whichever contact details you have, so I can then send them some interview requests. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. You can get the secret Vinny Eastwood Facebook group. You get the unlisted videos that are pretty dangerous, and also you can suggest a guest if you donate. So you can donate through PayPal, Patreon and KiwiBank as well. Please set up an automatic payment today. The PayPal buttons on the homepage, have little drop-down buttons, and we can see Perth Observer in the chat room as well of the main page of the Vinny Eastwood Show. Stream here is posting in the chat room the donation options. So thank you very much for that, Perth, and thank you very much for the other admins as well across both channels. We've got the NZPP channel here, W924 and Amos 777. Thank you very much, guys, for helping us keep out the riffraff. And over here we've got Marley Pumpkin, BD, Perth Observer, and On the Fence with Muzza, as well as Richard Bonner. Thank you, guys, and Michelle Cannon Free as well. Lots and lots of wonderful mods here helping to serve the show on a show-by-show basis. And I just want to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that I am very ungrateful, just in general, and I apologise for that. So I want to make up for it by just saying thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Your support has been very, very heartening, because this is a very stressful time. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety with this lockdown and the possibility of even worse action, them coming to my home, taking my baby, or having one of these fake tests on us and shoved it up their nose and stuff like that. it's really difficult for me to deal with right now, and you guys make this so much easier to deal with simply by your support, both financially and in the chat rooms there. So thank you very much, everybody, for every single thing that you have done. I know I'm missing out so many names, and I always do, but again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to the Vinny Eastwood Show. I am not a credible journalist. I'm an incredible journalist.